All right, we're going to get things underway for everyone today. Just want to thank you all for coming to today's webinar, which is titled Streamline Testing Improve Student Success, How Möbius Transformed Placement at the University of Akron. With today's session, I just want to highlight a few different things just for the agenda before we get right into it. What we'll do is just do a first little welcome and meet your presenters who will be talking today, who will be speaking during the slides. First, we'll start with Dr. Sara Rieder Bennett. She'll do her portion on math placement at her university, the University of Akron. And then Christina Perdiculias, COO and president of Digital Ed. She'll be talking about Digital Ed's solution for setting students up for success. And then at the very end, we'll do and handle some Q&A from the audience. Now, on that note, you might be wondering, how do you submit your questions if you're in the middle, during Dr. Sara's presentation or Christina's and you have a question in your Zoom bar. So depending on your platform and what device you're using, could be at the very top, could be at the very bottom of your screen right now. It might be hidden, so make sure you move your mouse around. There'll be a Q&A button. If you click on that Q&A button, you'll then see that there's an option for you to type in your question. Type in your question, and we will either respond to you directly inside of the Q&A window, depending on the question, or we'll save it to the very end of the entire webinar. So both after Sara and Christina talk. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them directly into the Q&A window, and we'll handle them either when we receive them or at the very end. With that in mind, if we don't have an opportunity just because of time constraints to respond to the question that you ask, we will follow up with you after the webinar and we'll, myself or Christina or Sara will reach out to you directly and we'll respond to you through email. All right, with that in mind, let's meet who we will be hearing from today. So first, I want to just introduce Dr. Sara Rieder Bennett. She is a director of testing at the University of Akron in Ohio, the USA. A little bit of a bio I just want to read about her right now. She has her PhD, and she is the testing director, like I just mentioned, at University of Akron. With a PhD in counseling psychology from the same institution, she boasts extensive experience in university and community settings. Notably, she has held leadership roles in various associations, including serving as president of NCTA and past president of GLCTA. Her contributions extend to editing journals and chairing committees, both within the University of Akron and at NCTA. Recognized for her dedication, she received the 2019 NCTA President's Award. Her expertise spans feminist and multicultural counseling, health psychology, testing assessment, and supervision. So that's Sara right there. She'll be speaking first, but before that, let me just talk about who I am and who Christina is. And as I mentioned before, Christina is our president and COO at Digital Ed. So leveraging her experience and executive roles within the technology sector, she spearheads Digital Ed's strategic direction, executive leadership, and overall management. So she has orchestrated numerous successful product launches, ranging from desktop engineering simulation tools to enterprise security SaaS solutions. She holds 2 master's degrees today, both in engineering and in data analytics, and she's also a licensed professional engineer, underscoring her commitment to driving innovation and excellence in the technology landscape. And lastly, but not of course, most important is myself. I'm Johnny Zivku. I am the director of product marketing here at Digital Ed. I'm a seasoned product marketer, specifically in the field of ed tech, education technology, for the last 15 years. I've been marked by relentless dedication to empowering schools and educators to excel in delivering top-tier STEM courses. I'm committed to bridging the gap between technology and education, just ensuring that students have access to the best tools and resources to thrive in today's dynamic world. I mean, it's fun to read your own biography, so I'll say that much. But with that in mind, I am going to pass things over now to Sara, who'll speak about math placement at the University of Akron. So Sara, when you're ready, feel free to unmute yourself and let me know when to proceed in the slides.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Johnny and Christina, for inviting me here today. It's been fun to work with you both on this project. So next slide, we're going to basically just give a little bit of a background on what math placement here at the University of Akron looks like, what it looked like before I got involved as well. So as many places were prior to the year 2000, we were in paper-based testing for all of our placement. So we were using the asset at that point, and that was done through the center that I sit in, Counseling and Testing Center testing. And that, when we hit late 1990s, that everything started moving to computer-based, rather than, and this is way before my time, rather than expanding our existing center and adding more computers, what happened is we needed a computer center very quickly. So with the shift to Compass, a computer-based assessment and evaluation center was spun up out of what was an existing computer lab with the staff there being trained with an IT background. So it was two different models. At that time, we were in two different divisions, different leadership, and math placement was managed entirely by computer-based assessment and evaluation. So sometime back in about June 2015, I think all of us who were Compass schools at that time got the very scary news that ACT was discontinuing by the end of, I believe, November 2016. So we had a pretty quick turnaround of deciding that we needed to take a look at what else was out there and what options existed. So at that point, I was asked to join the committee as an outside consultant due to, I was coming out of the testing field, whereas the folks that we were working with in CBAE were coming out of that IT background. So with my familiarity with testing vendors and tools, we kind of came together to bring our different expertise and convene a placement committee. So between 2015 to 2016, we got a lot of stakeholders involved in this. So that importance of really bringing together each of the voices that is going to impact the processes, the policies, procedures, the actual content. So we really needed our faculty and administrators over those key areas to be included, as well as new student orientation who have a stake in the process of what it looks like when people take testing, how it's assigned, how that can get to our academic advisors. Of course, working with our legal counsel as well to do the contracting process, the IT services staff who are going to be more familiar with, the security features of tools, the technological features of tools, and are actually going to vet some of the software to determine what we're able to provide. And then finally, of course, testing center staff. We were pretty unique here at the University of Akron that we've had several locations where testing could take place, including CTC testing where I am, CBAE, as I mentioned, and then the Office of Accessibility, who provide some of their own testing in terms of the more intensive accommodations that need to be administered. So all of these people came together. And what we found was that a barrier prior to creating that committee was that we really didn't have anybody under the same organizational structure. We really lacked a central decision-making structure and ownership of placement testing as a whole. So while CBAE was administering math, reading, and writing because it had moved to computer-based, we were still managing language placement, so foreign language placement, just kind of mishmash of who was doing what and which place. And we really recognized as well that we needed to have a central role of making policy decisions and owning that the content expert and stakeholders of all of these parts. So once that committee came together, that allowed all of our subject matter experts to have a say and to arrive at a consensus. Through that process, starting around 2018, we had a dean overseeing computer-based and a VP overseeing counseling and testing. And that also led to convening a working group to get some feedback on how testing services was actually managed on campus. It wasn't, the best model to have us all in different locations with different people involved. Ultimately, that led to a charge for me and the assistant dean of the libraries to conduct a benchmarking study and then come back with our report on recommendations. All of that resulted in all of the testing units, which included, of course, MySpace, CBAE, and accessibility, being reorganized under one structure, reporting to me, who all report to my executive director, who oversees counseling, testing, and accessibility. So that really streamlined that communication process, consistency of our policies and procedures, allowed for more cross-training of our staff. And as we kind of thought about why and where to put all of this, we really determined to house it under student affairs because of the focus on retention, engagement, and success of all students. Further, our existing testing unit here in CTC has been in place since 1947. We've done a wide range of services and experience, have that expertise in testing and assessment and evaluation. And then, additionally, we had talked about my supervision would be helpful because of my training and responsibility for the psychological and vocational testing that we talked about. Accessibility and disability documentation is a big part of my role as well. And then just the general mission of our center, having the vision that any assessment, any testing should be a student-centered activity. that we don't mean for these things for placement testing to come across as high stakes or anxiety provoking, though of course we know people will feel some of those things with the results of any testing. But really it's about helping our students succeed and figuring out how do we have that shared vision as a staff. And now we're about 6 years on from that reorganization process getting started and 4 years on from us working together formally, all under that same shared vision of meeting our students where they're at. So next slide, Johnny. So as we brought this placement testing committee together to figure out where do we go and what do we do next? Of course, the very first thing we needed to do was really identify what are our available options, what are the companies that are out there, what platforms are available, and what options do we have within our existing structure. So we created a list of all of the existing math placement tools that we could find, as well as just our learning management software as an option should the faculty be open to developing their own test items. Pros and cons with each of those, but we really looked, far and wide to find, what might be able to meet the needs that we had as we were sort of in that forced having to re-examine, but it gave us an opportunity to think, well, what is it that's been a pain point, what's working for us and what isn't. So our next step was really thinking about what are our desired test policies and procedures. So that group of people, everybody had slightly different visions of what they needed. So understandably, our new student orientation, they were concerned about having something available for students to take before they got to their orientation appointment. So having something that was available to do proctored or unproctored that could be taken online at another center even, that became very important to them. But thinking about what are all the pieces that need to be in place before we identify what's the best tool for our needs. So who should take placement testing, for what purposes, and how do we need them to take it? While we have placement testing for all of our different content areas, our math placement here has some specific complicating factors. So an example is for reading placement testing, our students just need to hit a single college-ready benchmark on ACT, SAT, or the placement test. And that allows them to bypass college reading and study skills or developmental coursework to go straight into the classes that they would need. With math, obviously, it's a more complicated process. We have a lot more content and a lot more levels at which somebody might start. So we have a developmental pathway, a technical pathway, and then algebra to calculus pathways based on our students' intended program of study. And initial placement starts with their existing ACT or SAT scores and past coursework. So that meant that we needed a platform or a test with enough flexibility and content coverage to allow us to tailor to the specific course pathway. So an example is we needed to have a basic math skills test that covered for all of our students who were coming in with no or low ACT or SAT scores to determine if they even require developmental math coursework or need to skip over that into what we call our everyday life sequence. So those are the basic stats for everyday life or math for everyday life that most majors on campus, they take that one class and they're done. But we also needed trigonometry to be covered, as we have a number of students who are actually going through the technical math coursework. And then finally, to streamline advancing, getting to advanced math, such as calculus for students with those higher ACT or SAT scores who intend to go into math-heavy majors such as engineering. For those students, we wanted to make sure they're not taking up unnecessary time or over testing by taking the basic math testing that they would jump right over. And that they really don't need for that orientation process. So that told us that we needed something that allowed us to build or have available multiple math sequences in terms of the testing. As I mentioned, we also needed something that gave us the option of proctored versus unproctored testing, which has pros and cons. As a testing staff member, I'm generally in favor of the proctored. We know that we're more likely to get accurate test scores that way, but we also had to balance that with the accessibility and flexibility for our students to be able to access the testing and be able to get into their coursework. So what we did is really look at, if students are taking all of their placement testing on the same day as their orientation, it overbooks testing and it overbooks the orientation advisors. But it also allowed us to say, well, maybe we allow an initial unproctored test, but for all retesting or continuation testing, we can have different policies. And there's that flexibility again in what Möbius allows us to do, that we can have that either or system. Obviously, another important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at the platform that you want would be understanding what the administrative overhead is for your testing options. There are only so many of us who manage placement testing here on campus. And so knowing what the steps are for registering, administering, even resetting, let's say a student gets disconnected or they accidentally hit the submit test button. Maybe, the scoring has some issues or we need to be able to pull scores easily and see some of the details of an individual student's test scores and answers, as well as the administrative tasks of loading the scores to student records. So what does it look like to pull the data out of the system? So all of that kind of taken into account as well, so that we know whatever we're choosing is able to work within the system that we already have. Obviously, higher education cost benefit's going to be a piece of what we need to consider as well. So we needed to think about what are the costs associated with each of the platforms that we have available, which includes not just that initial expense of setup and training, but also any recurring costs. And flexibility in how those costs could be paid or managed. So an important thing here at the University of Akron is we don't charge our students for any placement testing. So we had to have an option that allowed for the institutional billing model. We may charge students for retesting. So if they select to retest, if they're not happy with their test score, we can charge them for that. But we needed an option that didn't, pass the cost along to our students. Obviously needs to be budget friendly. And then consideration of what the actual cost structure is. So there's tests that have cost per test and cost per seat. So Möbius, it's one seat per student for a whole year. So that also gave us the flexibility with those students if they need to do additional testing or go up the testing chain that we'll talk about later. It's not a fee each time they do that. It is a fee for 1 year for that student to have access to the platform. So that also kind of factored into our, what is our flexibility in terms of retesting. And then finally, we had thought about, I think lots of schools will talk about, the possibility of actually building your own homegrown test, which we could have used our existing LMS to do, but there's significant staff costs. So we'd be taking the cost that we would be paying a placement testing company or an LMS and passing it on to our staff here to build and manage any of those. And of course, it's not the most user-friendly tool for the purpose either. It's not built for that. So we took all of that into account, and then ultimately the committee did select to work with Möbius and began implementation in 2016. So we have several thousand students coming in every year, and looking at our numbers, over 60% of our incoming students are assigned math testing. So that really did become very important, as if we're having 2,000 to 3,000 students coming in and taking math testing or being assigned to take math testing, we needed to be flexible and easy to use and quick. Next slide, please. All right. So I kind of, started getting at some of these pieces in the previous slide, but why did we decide on Möbius? One of the big things that we realized is that it does allow some of those customized test settings that weren't available necessarily in some of the other platforms. So we won't necessarily talk about those other platforms, but in many cases, what you're getting is a canned test. Those tests may be, the items may change from person to person, but the content that's covered, it's set and we don't have any control over it. So what we learned with Möbius is that we can set it to proctored or unproctored. We can set the number of attempts that somebody's able to make, whether that's the number of proctored attempts or unproctored. We can change our time limit on how long students are allowed to test. So it's not an unlimited time limit, or we can set it to be if we wanted it. We can edit we have edit access to basically all test instructions. So each screen that pops up before a test is language that we've developed and created. And then the language at the end of the test is also what we've asked to have in place. We can select our items as well. We can select our reset attempts and how to reopen it. And it's very easy to do the reopening. You go and find that student and just select to reset or restart a test. We can set time extensions for our accommodations as well. So if we find out one student has 100% extended time, we just plug that in when we register that student. And then again, we are able to make it so that when a student has to retest, our placement committee did as a whole agree that retesting needs to be done in a proctored environment. We want to make sure that it's the most accurate score that could be. So that allows us that flexibility as well. All of that came in very handy, of course, in 2020, when we went completely remote for, I think it was 4 to 5 months. We didn't have to change anything with our math placement testing. We just, completely continued as normal, and didn't have a backlog when we came back to campus in August. I mentioned, we get to choose our item bank, or our items that we choose from the item bank. So there is a very large item bank covering a broad range of math content. And there's already robust statistical and subject matter expert support. So we didn't have to build all of our items from scratch. What we had to do was work with our math faculty to determine what needed to be covered in each of those tests. So if we decided, the basic arithmetic needs to have fraction items, as I have on the slide, we could select how many fraction items and select those from an existing bank rather than having to start fresh. That allowed us to be able to look pretty quickly at what the item analysis is for each of the items. As we can look and see what it's like for the test bank as a whole, or what it's like for our students. So that helped us to be able to build 5 different levels of our testing based on the different pathways that students come in as. So if a student is only needing to go into, again, that everyday life pathing, they may take basic arithmetic or basic algebra, but they're not having to go all the way up through calculus. They may not ever see the calculus items. That also allowed us, what was really important for us is our tech math tree has a lot of trigonometry in terms of the coursework. But what we were finding is we couldn't find tests that had a lot of trigonometry in them. By being able to work with Möbius, we could build our own test within, we could have a trig test alone, or we could have that built into our advanced algebra. Another thing that it allows us to do is we can actually customize the items themselves. So we can go in and change the instruction set on the item, or display them in random order, or even have the variables and items change. So I think there's something like 3 to 5, I think we said it's something like 3 to 5 different versions of each of the item contents that will be shown. So if a student does retest, they're not seeing the exact same item. They may see the same content type, but at least then we know, we could have 5 different students taking 5 different tests, basically. We also found the editability of the items became really important because we rely a lot on our data, our outcome data, as well as our item analysis data to make sure that we are meeting that overall goal of student success and retention. So one thing that we found probably 2 years, I think it was 2018, so 2 years into our data, is we did an item analysis, which you pull straight from the Möbius platform. You do not have to do this from scratch. And we were able to see all the stats for each of our items and notice that our fraction items, despite being listed as easy content, had one of the lowest pass rates of all of our items. So 0.3 success rate on our basic arithmetic fraction items. That was concerning to us. If it's an easy item, and generally you want to see a p-value around 0.5 so that we know that this item discriminates pretty well between students who have the test content and students who don't. What we did is we were able to look at, pull a random sampling of students who answered those items incorrectly. And what we found is they didn't have the wrong answers. They entered the answers in wrong. So there were 2 boxes, numerator, denominator, and a slash between them. And we found those students kept putting in the answers into the first box as a whole, which does not mean they were wrong. It just means they didn't know how to engage in this platform. So what we ended up being able to do was add instruction set to those items beforehand to explain how to answer it. And then actually in the HTML, we were able to increase the size of the actual fraction so that you could see that there was a line between. So that helped. And what we found after just that simple change was that change from 0.3 success rate to 0.53, which meet our requirements. Beyond that, so, talking about that, the variables change each time you see. The formular structure stays the same. So you're getting the same content covered with each student, but it's the algorithmic variables. So we know that it's different each time. If we want to, we can develop our own items. So if in the very large test bank, we don't find what we need covered, we can still find that and, add that in ourselves. Another thing that we found really helpful, there's a lot that we can customize and a lot that we can do as administrators in the platform. But if there's ever something we run into that we don't know how to fix or we don't know what to do with, we found a very quick response time for our customer support. So we reach out to our customer support team and get an immediate response. If they can't solve it, they go to the technical support. And we've not found that we've had over a day of responding to anything, and no problems that were like urgent to respond to that took any time. We also found that there's very clear documentation from the subject matter experts at Möbius and at MAA, so that we know exactly how the items were developed and what they're intended to cover, and we have all that documentation. So whereas there may be, there's other platforms out there where we have to trust that it covers the content, we can pull this and look specifically and see what is covered. That ease of administration and management. So something that's been very helpful to us, obviously, is we are able to do batch uploading or individual uploading to register students. So most days we're getting a list of hundreds of students through our new student orientation process who need to be registered. It takes a couple minutes. If we have an individual one-off who needs to be registered because maybe they changed their major and now they need a different test assigned, we can do that as well pretty quickly. That also allows us to pull test scores at either a batch or individual level. So we can look at the overall outcome data. We can pull everybody's test scores for the last day and make sure that it's uploaded through our integration software into our student records. But we can also look at a specific student's record. So if a student, say, reaches out to their advisor and is concerned that I got kicked out of the test and I didn't get to see all the items and I should get a reset without having to come in and get proctored, we can go in and see exactly how many items they've seen, what they've answered, how long they were in the exam, when they logged in or out. So you get some of those features that we would get with a learning management system without having to actually develop and maintain all the test content ourselves. As I mentioned before, it helps us that we can do the fees paid institutionally, and it's based on seats used per year. So we don't have to pay each time a student takes a test. It's just their access code is set up. And then the advanced policy settings actually allowed us further customization. So as I mentioned before, we have 5 test levels. So it starts at the arithmetic, goes to basic algebra, advanced algebra with trig, and then calculus. For students who are coming in without an ACT or SAT score, they were being placed in the basic arithmetic. And then when they passed that, they would reach out to their advisor to say, hey, can you put me in the next one? So that's the student having to reach out to the advisor filling out a form and sending it to the testing staff going in and registering for the next test, which became a really administrative mess. So in 2018, during a committee meeting, one of the staff who was actually managing that process mentioned it, and we realized there's features we're not using yet. So some of the advanced policy settings allowed us to do that further customization where we built like what we call now the branching test. That student who doesn't have any existing test scores or any existing placement will still start at arithmetic. But if they hit the pass score in that, it automatically opens up the next level until they reach, the level that they can't pass any longer. So rather than all this back and forth legwork, we can just have the student go through and they get their end of test, when they finally don't pass a level or they get all the way to calculus and pass that, it refers them to their advisor to talk about where they would go from there. So that saved us a lot of time over the last 5 years. And then final slide for me, I think. So some of the takeaways from how we've approached everything, I think one of the biggest ones is this is a team approach. You really need to get a lot of people together because there are so many subject matter experts and so many stakeholders throughout the entire process. So if any one of us had tried to do this alone, I think we would have been missing quite a bit of the information that we needed to have something that actually worked for the whole campus and that was focused on our student outcomes as we wanted it to be. So while I'm here by myself, there's probably like 15 people who need thanked for all of the work that has gone into developing everything that we do and managing everything we do from day to day. I think, as well, we do a lot of item statistic review and outcome scores. We look at, our ACT, SAT, and Möbius test scores pretty regularly, and then look at students' initial course placement and their grades in those courses. So, as we mentioned before, the entire point of what we do is about helping our students succeed and removing barriers to doing that. So when we looked at our outcome data, again, this was back in 2017 to 2018, we did a data review that led to us changing our cutoff scores to more appropriately place in the first math course. After that change, we saw a 17% increase in our pass rates minimally, just by knowing that, we needed to have an accurate number and cutoff for why students are getting into the courses that they did. And shockingly, our Calculus 1, which previously, I think across the state comes out to about a 50% pass rate, went up to 76% on just that tiny change that we did. So our cut scores are shifted depending on that data, along with our faculty input on their expected pass-fail rates. So there are stakeholders in terms of the subject matter content, but they're also, our stakeholders in terms of they're the faculty who are being held to a standard of getting students through a course. If they're dissatisfied with how something's placing our students, then we need to refocus and shift what's happening there. So we do that each year. We take a look and see, where are we at with things. We're due for another one as we're going into this next year, and we're actually working on co-curricular courses rather than having developmental coursework. And that's going to help us to figure out where we need to place our students with that. We're here in Ohio, so each state, each jurisdiction may have their different standards or different expectations to fall under. But here in Ohio, we have the Department of Higher Education remediation-free standards. The intent of it is to basically, again, it's about student success. We want to get our students into credit-bearing courses as quickly as possible without overplacing them. What we know from research is if a student is placed into developmental coursework, but they're actually advanced beyond that, and they should not have been placed in that, they may actually leave the school before they ever get into credit-bearing courses. Vice versa, our students who are overplaced, if they fail that first math course, they are not going back a level. They have the choice, but students will not opt into a lower level, even if that's what's right for them based on their advising model, their discussions with their faculty members. And so what we were finding is those students will continue in the same course, failing every time without working on the skills previous, until they fail out of that major. So they only get 3 chances. And if we don't make sure that we make the best opportunity with that, we're not helping our students succeed. So in terms of those remediation-free standards, if you do happen upon them, if you're in Ohio or you just take a look, you'll notice that they include ACT, SAT, AccuPlacer, Möbius, ALEKS, and PlaceU. Möbius is on there actually because our UA math representative was able to bring that to them. And so if you see the cut score, that is our cut score right now. So, if you do end up adopting it within the state, we'll need to talk about getting the pass rates updated in terms of the remediation-free standards for what is appropriate. And finally, I think what's very important to us here at the university that I've kind of, mentioned a number of times, and that I think is really important with digital ed and why this is a good partnership is our entire purpose is student success and retention. This is not about helping students to, pass over something they really need to brush up on, nor is it about holding students back when there may be just a little bit of content they need to brush up on. So I know something that we've talked about as we were preparing this is in terms of developmental or arithmetic math content, the number one thing that students tend to struggle with is fractions. And it's not necessarily because they can't do them, it's because they haven't done them in a long time. And so if we give students an opportunity to brush up on that one single skill, they're more likely to pass the math or arithmetic and get into a credit-bearing course faster. So one of the things that we've done over the years is we did develop a sample item document for each of those tests. We include educational tools in our pre-test instructions. We want to make sure that our students have a chance to refresh before testing, rather than jump in and have a high stakes, high anxiety experience where, they might not get into the course that they really need to be in. So we found it really flexible in terms of being able to get our students to the right spot in terms of starting. And at that, I will pass it over to Christina. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so I have the task of following Dr. Rieder Bennett, which as you can all now see, is a tough act to follow, given her knowledge and the deep-rooted passion for academic success and well-being for the students at University of Akron and frankly, anyone that passes through her testing services. So again, I'll echo what all of us have said even before you joined. Thank you so much for doing this for us and sharing your experience, because it is, we learn from it, and I think everyone in the audience will do the same. So what I would like to do is pick up on a point that you made early on about the focus on retention, engagement, and success of students as a motivator for those organizational changes to consolidate under, like, what a wonderful title, counseling, testing, and accessibility. They are so co-related and interrelated, and that shared vision of meeting students where they are at is just chef's kiss. I don't know what else to say with that one. It's a wonderful way of capturing it. So we're inspired and encouraged when we see these mandates, because we see the difference it makes in the student's educational journey, and being in the position I'm in and having the benefit of being exposed to and having the opportunity to support these initiatives through digital ed and the offerings that we bring to the market as partners to the schools. It's just it's a great place to be here so that we can learn and also share that feedback with others. So Johnny, let's go to the next slide so we can cover off some of these and get to questions here. So at Digital Ed, we embrace STEM with both arms. Me being an engineer, I'm definitely very passionate about that, but anyone that has an engineering background also knows that math's at that core, and we are experts in mathematics. It is at our core as well, and we surface that expertise to our partner schools through Möbius and the companion solutions that we provide, including what Dr. Rieder Bennett highlighted today with the placement test suite. We know that a student's skills and competencies and knowing where they lie, it's a key element of their success path. If we assess those abilities ahead of inviting them to their first year courses so that we can use that information to ultimately ensure that they're going in the right path and they're being successful in the first steps, we believe that's a key element of it. And again, University of Akron is basically showing that to everyone in terms of what they're looking at. How do we make sure we're putting students both, the term of underplacing and overplacing is a critical point. It's a distinction. I think it's important that we emphasize that point along the way. But as you can see from some of the statistics shared on this slide, it just echoes some of the points that Dr. Rieder Bennett mentioned. It's setting a student up for success in first year mathematics is a universal challenge. These numbers are taken, the ones on the slide, from North American studies, but we've seen similar numbers from regions around the world. So that tells us that the transition from secondary school mathematics to higher education is decidedly an event for a large proportion of these students, and many are simply not ready to take that step, just going from one to the next. So it ultimately, that's why you're all here. It impacts all of you and how you plan to support your students as they go through that transition, and also as you work to retain them so that they don't get discouraged if they do fall short, and make sure that they're able to meet that challenge in the next steps. So John, if you take us to the next slide. I think I'm bringing up a point here that you already know, but that was also mentioned earlier, that it isn't just their skills and competencies that are working against them. The negative impact of math anxiety on the student's ability to perform on assessments is well documented. Now, just a short story. When I first met Dr. Rieder Bennett, it was clear to me that it was no coincidence that someone with a background in counseling psychology had this deep connection to student success and was integral in curating this environment along with the big team of colleagues to ensure that testing services didn't stop at administering the test. That's a huge task in of itself, and those of you that are doing that are doing a lot of work, but it doesn't stop there, and having the bigger picture around there is really critical. And as you can see, the results are wonderful for everyone involved, students, staff, everyone. They have seen the positive result of building that network of resources and paths for practice and remediation for their students, in addition to this purposeful analysis to refine what's presented to them. And it ultimately helps students build their confidence and achieve success and set them on that right path. Now, from a technology perspective, we take that position and we can contribute to these goals and initiatives by staying true to the practices and principles that are known to help students overcome their anxieties and help them achieve success in math. And also ultimately, as your partner, giving you the tools to realize those goals. So for us, it means offering opportunities for students to practice in a low stakes environment or at a pace that they can dictate on their own, where they can receive feedback on their progress immediately, either correcting them when they may have gone wrong or reinforcing what they got right, and keeping them engaged in some learning process that is dynamic, possibly with some interactive activities. And on top of that, for you, surfacing those analysis tools so you can properly evaluate those outcomes and align to what your targets are internally. So Johnny, next slide. Thank you. So that's why we've recently launched this Möbius Mathematics Readiness. We call it a bundle. It can be a bundle if you're new to digital ed. It's bundled up with a lot of different materials. If you've already used Möbius products, it's something you can add on to it. But it combines the best of the drill and practice resources along for the purpose of refreshing foundational knowledge of those secondary school math principles, but also with a portfolio of carefully balanced, statistically validated assessments that we've been discussing this whole time that comes from the MAA with the placement test suite. So together, they complete this cycle from what I would say both ends, that they cement those foundations that they need to succeed with the foundational math principles, and then you can reinforce those skills as you expect them to have to take those next steps in higher ed math. So in the next slide, I talk through really quickly the drill and practice part. And this part of the solution is a complete course that's structured under 6 full math units, 1 getting started unit that gets people up and running so they can use the system, and with 67 lessons with illustrative visualizations, unlimited practice, helpful hints, immediate feedback, all of it to promote active learning. And it also includes 7 assignments along with it and over 870 questions that you can use to create your own course materials and supplement the existing course materials that you might have. And because it's all built on Möbius, you can refine, edit, customize, and fit it to your curriculum. And the purpose here is really providing an open, low stakes, practice, learn environment that allows the students to really get that retention and reinforce what they think they know. Because we all know that there's that illusion of knowing if you continue to read and read the same thing, you think you got it until you actually apply it. And once you apply it, really quickly you realize, oop, that's not what I thought it was. So let's go back and correct that immediately. And on the next slide, we're reinforcing what we've done with the MMA placement test suite. And our partnership with the MMA has been longstanding and obviously well respected globally. But as a Mathematical Association of America, they have created, and along with us on the Möbius platform, a series of pre-built. So these are pre-built tests that are ready to deploy based on skills-based and concept-based tests with recommended time limits for each test. They have multiple test variations for the test. You have testing diversity. And of course, again, because it's built on Möbius, just like Dr. Rieder Bennett mentioned, it has an infinite number of variations because you can edit it as well. And you can do what you want to do to match it with your curriculum. And of course, the analysis tools to ensure you're getting the results you're looking for. Now, ultimately, this package was built through feedback from our customers. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of you on the call that have given us that feedback, and obviously our partners at U of Akron. And I'm definitely looking forward to everyone's feedback on when they see what's coming out with this one with the package as well. So with that, I'll pass it to Johnny to help field questions in the last bits that we have.
Yeah, thank you. So as a reminder to people, we did have some questions come through, but if you have any further questions, feel free to go to the Q&A window in your Zoom bar there and type them in, and we'll respond either directly within Zoom or we will answer them live right now. Sarah, just as a heads up, there are a few in the answered area of the Q&A window that you can reinforce what I already told them, but feel free to check those out yourself. The first question I'll actually handle, and maybe Christine, you can jump in if you want to as well with your thoughts, but are there any pre-built placement exams that come with Möbius or a shared community folder of placement exams from other universities or colleges? So to answer the first part, through our Möbius MAA placement test suite, there are several pre-built placement exams that come with that courtesy of the MAA. There are about 65 to 70 pre-built placement tests that cover a variety of topics. Those are available, within the solution. In terms of a shared community folder, you can, if you have created your own placement test that you'd like to share with other colleges and universities, you can do that through a variety of ways. You can send them as attachments in an email to somebody, like you can download the Möbius materials and then attach them in an email. You can share them directly in the product to other schools and universities. So I think the answer is yes to both. There are pre-built exams from the MEA, and you can share them with other universities and colleges if you'd like to. It's ultimately your decision if you would or not. A few other questions here I'm going to just look over now. Christina, why don't you handle this question? So the placement tests were developed in cooperation with MAA. What about that review and readiness materials? Who was that developed by, and was there a partnership, or do you have any background on that you could share with the team?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's a two-part and a yes, but. So this is you set me up really well. So in this one, it was developed in conjunction with one of our university partners, along with us. So we paired up with them to build it, and primarily to hit those foundational courses, because we didn't want it to be a course that helps you pass the placement test. We wanted it to be a course on foundational mathematics so that they can prepare them for it. Having said that, the yes but part, our CEO, Marty Callahan, has been partnering up very closely with MAA recently, and we've been spending more time with them looking at new opportunities. So not only have we had a long-standing partnership with them on the placement test, we're looking at, well, what else can we do? What other types of materials we can do? So we don't have something yet from the MAA directly on this, but we definitely are cooking up some more with them, because they are a wonderful institution. We want to make sure we work well with them as we go forward.
Thanks, Christina. A question for you, Sarah. So feel free to unmute yourself while I read it out to you. But have there been any challenges or drawbacks with using Möbius for your placement testing? And if so, how did you address those as you uncovered them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think really that is sort of that iterative data process that we've looked at. Those would be some of the bigger challenges and I saw somebody had commented on that question as well, sort of the fraction item. And that was really just, looking at the data and then saying, does this seem accurate given everything else that we know? Whether it's about this content area or, I saw someone else actually said something about ACT scores, given the person's ACT scores as well. So we do take that into account and look at both pieces. I think we've been able to address those challenges by just being open to identifying them and then saying, what can we do? Whether it's something that our staff and faculty can address directly. So for instance, I think to Christina's point, a challenge I think we've had on campus, and it's not about Möbius, it's about people's attitudes toward placement testing in general. There are folks who I think will view any placement test as a barrier, as opposed to what we see it as is an opportunity to move forward. So based on everything we know about the student, this is where we would place them, but the placement test gives them a chance to move up from that. Not everyone sees it that way. So a concern people did have was that students are not feeling prepared. They don't know what to expect going into the platform. So that is why we, getting that feedback, we developed our own sample items, and that was our faculty who put those together based on their content knowledge of what was covered in each of the existing tests. And we've made that available with, pre-instructions and places that people can go to brush up on skills at this point. So I think that's one of the, it's not necessarily a Möbius challenge, it's a preparedness challenge for students coming in to take tests. And we've really tried to, I think Christina used that, like non-content, basically non-content validity. When somebody, whatever score they're getting on the test, is it just a reflection of their content knowledge, or is there something else happening? We want it to be as much the content knowledge as possible. So how do we take away, anxiety, or just taking the test in a bad environment, or having too many retesting experiences? That was something when I came into managing the placement testing with my current staff. There was no limit on retesting when I started. And we said, well, that's not an appropriate thing to do based on what we know about retest, on practice effects, and everything else that could be happening. So we looked at that as well. But we said the point that we should have is that somebody scores as much about their math preparedness as possible, and we're going to do everything we can to take other things out of that. Provide clear instructions, clear informed consent. Maybe answer too many things, not sure, but.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. That's perfect. Another question here that came in through, and Christina, I'll pass this one over to you, and I'll just read it as it came through. So retention is very key, as many students drop out of STEM courses, very often. Could you elaborate more on how we can use Möbius effectively to enhance student retention?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's all part of that idea of how do you build student confidence, and I think that it's a contributor. Obviously, just building on what Dr. Rieder Bennett just said, that there are other factors, and we try to remove the factors that that we can control, and then the other ones we do our best to try to, alleviate where that tension is. So when we look at the way that Möbius is used and where we've seen more retention is that if you take the time, and you can, and in many cases it's very, very easy to do, you bring it in and we call it mobification. You take a standard question and add some spark to it so that it can be created in an algorithmic way. Students can practice the same question type over and over again with different variables to make sure they got it right. And I always say that for me, this is a big thing that I link on to. When I joined, when I was first year university, I was one of those students that was at a high school that probably bumped up the grades a little bit. So I thought I was much better student than I really was when I got to first year university. And like we say, my tail was handed to me swiftly in that first year because I realized very quickly, oh my goodness, like I need a little bit more time, I need more practice to catch up with where everyone else is. So the retention side of things is how do you give students this low stakes environment to build their confidence, to know what they do know, and make sure that when things that they don't know, they're right in front of them and they get that feedback quickly rather than waiting for a week for a test to come back or relying on one or two practice problems that might not quite get to the essence of what they're looking for, and letting those students that really do need to get a little bit more drill into them, let them do that independently and then come prepared for class the next time. We have found that students with given that instant feedback, they do take more time on the platform. And our analysis shows that when we look at the statistics, that the students that did struggle initially, they'll do the 2 or 3 or 4 more attempts to get it done of a specific question so they can cement in their head that they've got it right. And that ultimately helps with their end outcomes and with retention.
Cool, thank you, Christina. I'll answer one more, and I think that'll be the last one given the timing. So the issue of proctoring in Möbius was noted earlier. How does proctoring work with Möbius, especially if testing is remote and online? So proctoring is done right inside of Möbius natively. So these options I'm about to tell you are available right inside the platform. But there are some features you can enable or disable to make things more secure for proctoring purposes. So the first is you can require students to receive authorization from a proctor or teacher to start a test. That authorization can happen right at the student's machine. So if they're live in a testing facility, or if they're in a computer lab, teachers can go around, verify identity, and then authorize them on the student's machine. Or to your question, it can be done remotely, where if they're in total different locations, students can verify their identity somehow. And again, this is your choice, whether it's through email, whether it's through a Zoom call, whether it's through some type of application. You have to verify their identity and then you authorize them remotely. So that's possible as well. You can also provide password protected tests. This is where, it's still a type of authorization, but it's more, all they need is a password to enter or grade the test. They don't require authorization from a proctor. So this is a little bit more less restrictive because, if the password is sent in bulk to your students, or you post it on like your LMS, for example, for consumption, that there's less security around that password being shared or passed around the students. But that is an option to at least lock it down a little bit. We also have a third thing you can implement, which is called the Möbius proctored browser. What this is, it's your browser that they use to take the test that restricts them from going to other websites or other programs. It's a lockdown environment, if you would. So that can be enabled as well to kind of restrict students from exiting the testing experience. Now, a fourth thing I'll mention that's not native to Möbius, but we do integrate with other third-party proctoring services. We do have partnerships with several of them in North America and Europe. So if you are interested in doing more of a thorough, more high secure environment with webcams and AI and screen recording, we do have partnerships with a few providers that enable you to implement that. Now, I should say that that's a third-party opportunity, so there will be additional, costs and concerns you have to worry about for that regard. But we do partner with them, and Möbius does integrate just nice. All righty, so those are the questions we have time for today. There were a few more that came through that we don't have time to. So we will respond to you through email as well. There were some people who asked, hey, can you show in this Zoom webinar a placement test? Can you show Möbius? Again, just with time, we weren't able to, so we'll connect with you to set up a time to do that separately. But I do want to thank especially Sara, who was our VIP today, who did a great presentation on their use of Möbius. University of Akron. Of course, Christina, thank you as well for presenting about Möbius Mathematics Readiness. And lastly, thank you all for attending today. I hope you enjoyed our webinar. We will be sending you a follow-up communication with a recording that you can use and share with your staff. And with that, I just hope that everyone has a great day and a great rest of their week. Take care, everybody.